Martin Luther King is the reason why we have a Zohran Mamdani.
We further looked at the early stages of John F. Kennedy's unconstitutional civil rights bill.
I am therefore asking the Congress to enact legislation.
You'll remember at the time there was a debate raging in Congress between the idea of state sovereignty versus the idea of federal authority. You should also remember that we were in the middle of the Cold War, and the communists were exploiting, exaggerating, and in some cases instigating discrimination in the United States in order to demonstrate to the rest of the world that a constitutional republic cannot offer the same degree of freedom as a communist system. Understanding that in order to...
Now we got to keep in mind that we're still going through the same battle. Nothing's changed. When I looked at, please go to his site, Chad O. Jackson. I mean, it's a well-crafted documentary. I mean, he's releasing parts to the series, I think, weekly. But that's true. I mean, we're still dealing with the same communism, socialism, socialist mentality that a lot of Americans in the 60s and 70s fought against. We're dealing with the same thing. Nothing's really changed when you look at it. Well, there's been some change, but it's not been for the good.
Pressure Congress to take up the legislation or to win in the court of law, you must first win in the court of public opinion. JFK allowed, some would argue reluctantly, for there to be a March on Washington in 1963. This, of course, is where Martin Luther King delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech. In my effort to confront and debunk the romanticized and sanitized way in which the speech is falsely framed today, in the last episode, we revealed the true intentions and the long-term goal of the I Have a Dream speech as admitted by Bayard Rustin, who was one of King's top advisors and the engineer of the March on Washington.
When the white unemployed join the Negroes in creating social dislocation in the interest of jobs, we must separate pay from work. No matter what we do, we will never again put all Americans who are capable of work back to work. And therefore, the first principle for which I stand, and Negroes will have to increasingly stand for it, as will the white miners in Tennessee and elsewhere. Question is no longer how much does a man get for work, because there is not enough work and cannot be. We have to establish the social principle, make it a part of our constitutional way of life, that a man is paid a decent wage, whether or not this society can put him to work.
So we've been speaking about social, a universal, same thing Andrew Yang spoke about, a universal income. The concept of the universal income, when I tell people it started with socialism. And I had a brother ask me, and he asked me a really good question. Do you believe in democratic socialism? And the reason I don't believe in it is because it stifles creativity. It puts you in a position where your brain isn't challenged to actually create anything, fix anything, dream of anything, because you already know you have a check coming to you. Why should I do anything different? Why should I do anything different? And that is the reason why. Is this Luti? I don't know. What does that mean? You got to tell me what that means. I don't know what that means. Okay, cool. Here we go.
And this is a profound and radical idea, but it is an idea which will emerge. The Negroes will understand it first.
In the next episode, we will further look at opposition to the Civil Rights Bill and its eventual passage after the tragic assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And of course, since the Civil Rights Bill was never meant to be the end, it was never meant to be enough, we will look at the subsequent attempt to pass the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which coincides with the communist plan for mass enfranchisement for an ultimate proletarian revolution. Lastly, Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement took the Negro from a trying race to a crying race. Prior to his rise and prior to the rhetoric that we began to see in the Civil Rights Movement, it was cast down your bucket where you are, put your hand to the plow. Nobody's going to give it to you. It's up to you. Joseph H. Jackson was famous for saying, it's up to men to be men.
It keeps me from being jealous of others. It keeps me from being lost in pride when I know there's something else I could do. More growth, more power, more strength. Lord, make me a better man. If you're not going to be men, braid your hair and start wearing step-ins. God has carefully made you and fixed you just right, and you're trying to change it. Let men be men.
But as King would come along in the interview,
And is it interesting that he's talking about letting men be men and not letting men act or move like women? This was in the 60s. That's an actual recording of Joseph A. Jackson speaking. And I didn't know about Joseph A. Jackson until I had to do a deep dive and really research who he was. But he was actually talking about gay, homosexual activity amongst African-American men in the 60s. Now, how do I know? I'm going to let it finish.
he was asked about these kinds of things. And he would say that, well, men can't be men because of housing conditions and because of this and because of that.
We haven't been men because of all of the conditions that we've lived with and the syndrome of deprivation surrounding conditions, whether it's in housing, in the economic area, or in schools, or in the vicious credit practices that we face.
Now, when I hear this, I hear someone, Martin Luther King, feeling the pain of what people deal with on a daily basis. But there's also a sub communication that's going on. There is a place where you're making excuses for the situation. Yeah, you're saying, oh, they're responsible for me. That's the reason why we can't be men. You're getting away from the one that actually made you a man, gave you a mission, gave you a purpose, gave you gifts and talents, made you in his image, and you're neglecting taking the time to discover him and discover yourself, and you're saying this system owes me this as retribution. And I'm not gonna say, listen, the United States didn't do wrong by black people. That's not the conversation. Yes, the country has done. The people at that time did wrong by us. But if we look further down the line, you'll start to see that we were doing so good despite of all of that. Something happened which took us from being dependent and relying in community and tribe of the black doctor that's in our neighborhood, the black lawyer that's in our neighborhood, the black teacher that teaches our children, to a place where we don't want to be together anymore. We don't want community really anymore. We want to assimilate to society and be accepted by people that don't necessarily look like us. Now we're going through Martin Luther King. We're going to a place of acceptance, and we want to be accepted, regardless of if you believe it or not. Everybody wants to buy that house with the white picket fence, or they want to have that condo that overlooks the water. They want to be accepted. Whereas black communities in the past, they had their own individual communities. Now we're going into segregation.
Ghetto and all of the problems of closed doors and constant defeats.
He was giving every excuse as to why men can't be men. Think about how embittering that is. Think about how deflating that is as a young black man to turn on the television and you see the person who you're told is the leader of the Negro telling you that men can't be men because of X, Y, and Z. As you move into the 70s, the age of indulgence, I call it, you have not only the black militant movement that succeeded the civil rights movement, you also have second wave feminism, you have gay liberation, which would later become the LGBT movement, you have free love, you have the hippie movement.
If you don't know what the black empowerment movement is, we're talking Black Panther, we're talking Malcolm X still on the scene doing, speaking about Negroes separating. All these things were taking place. And I kept saying this, and I keep saying this. This is the time, the liberals that we actually see right now rioting and protesting in Minnesota, you got to realize that type of liberal was birthed out of the hippie movement. Like, we don't want any regulations or controls from the government. Rule of law is not something we want. And matter of fact, because you tell me I can't feel this way, think this way, or do this way, you're a fascist. So these things that we see, they started somewhere. It just didn't start just in Minnesota or any of those places. It started somewhere with an ideology.
You have a lot of these things that are going on, which is basically the baby boomers who are coming of age rebelling against their parents' generation. And as a result of this, you see a decrease in marriage rates. And this was already happening. I mean, Daniel Patrick Moynihan wrote about this kind of downward trajectory that was happening, which is around the same time that King was kind of coming at the scene. I'm not laying it all at the feet of King. I'm just saying that this rhetoric, this kind of shift in mindset doesn't get as much attention paid to it as it ought to. If you're talking to Black liberals, they blame it on systemic racism. Talking to Black conservatives, they blame it on LBJ and the Great Society. I tend to agree more with the conservative contingent and the leftist contingent. However, King was actually far more radical than LBJ. LBJ's Great Society did a lot of negative things in terms of social welfare, but King didn't believe that it went far enough. So he started what was called the Poor People's Campaign, which was meant to go further than the war on poverty. And so we let our hands off the proverbial plow and we picked up the picket signs because we believe that those picket signs will get us the liberation we so desperately needed. We were interested in revolution as opposed to reformation. Reformation takes hard work, but in that hard work, there's a character building component. Whereas with your revolution, your sudden uprising is unsustainable and it will implode. You might get the...
And that's the reason why I don't subscribe to democratic socialism, because it takes hard work to be a capitalist, to do these things, to make things, to buy houses, to be creative, put digital programs together. It takes work to actually do this. And in the course of that work, dude, you discover so much about yourself if you take that journey. Some people don't want to take that journey. You ever heard that statement that the graveyard is full of people, a lot of, what was it, great ideas and concepts? They never took that journey. Some excuse kept them from walking down that road. And I get it, because the less you know who you are and your true identity in Christ, like that God walks with you every day. He's the one that keeps you from not stepping in that line of traffic. And you may think, oh, I was lucky and missed me. No, the steps of a righteous man are ordered by the Lord. Like he's trying to keep you for something. It's never luck. It's always a reason and a purpose. He wants you to lean. All of that goes out the window when you start talking about democratic socialism. It does. It's a more social gospel. It's more based on feeling and emotion. And a lot of that came from King, unfortunately.
Facade of progress, but that progress will soon implode. And we're starting to see it. I mean, Dr. Carol Swain wrote about something similar, I think in 2005, where she saw the writing on the wall as this kind of emerging kind of fight back that we're seeing amongst certain white folks. Because to the extent that you instill this kind of spirit of being a protected class into Blacks by way of the civil rights movement, what we saw happen as a result of this, in my opinion, is this kind of smug disposition amongst many Blacks, this kind of freedom to be openly racist, which we see in a lot of instances today, this kind of race paranoia, seeing racism where there is no racism, I think is one of the results. And for
you can't convince, I mean, I've had people on Facebook, different places I've talked to, you can't convince them that they're not overly paranoid. They're not paranoid about race. You can't convince them on that. Between the hangings and everything, the messages given out there, and experiences too. You can't convince them that it was something different or that they brought the energy to the room. You can't. And I'm not saying there's no racist people out there. Please don't say that. I'm not saying that. But sometimes we look so far into something that doesn't exist, and we never are able to really see clear.
A long period of time, many whites have been in a mode of flight, walking on eggshells around Blacks so as not to defend. But now you're seeing a certain contingent of whites moving into an age of fight. They've had enough. And so you see some white people being openly racist, and especially if you're spending your time on X and places like that. The issue that we saw with Blacks in terms of being on this kind of upward trajectory, and then around the time of the civil rights movement plateauing and then going on this rapid decline, is a result of a changing of the culture that exists not only amongst Blacks, we see amongst whites too.
Yeah. And I think the worst part about it is that a lot of blacks think, oh, that person's being racist to me, and not lying that they are. They probably well are being racist to you, or really exhibiting some type of racist persona or energy to you, and never really understand why. You think that is a color thing. A lot of times it's the smugness that you are more protected, you're better than the other class of people, because damn, I deserve to be protected. You brought the slaves over here, you gave us this, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. Damn, I'm gonna tell you honestly, I would say you being here, as painful and hate bad as it has been for black people to come to the United States as slaves, if you look at where Africa is right now, some great and powerful countries, good country. I'm not saying that everything's bad, but you have more lack of infrastructure, which leads to more diseases. I could tell you stories about people who fly from Africa, from Ghana, from Liberia, from Nigeria, from different places to come here to get the medical treatment that they need, because the simple thing is their running water isn't clean enough to sustain health. The infrastructure, black people help build it. That's true, but we got to understand the lie that's being told to us at the same time. Two things can be true at the same time.
I was criticized for favoring the teachings of Karl Marx and for joining the Communist Party. These accusations were true.
Now, this is W.E.B. Du Bois. When we look at him, a lot of people don't even speak about any of his communist connections. They don't speak about any of his socialist perspective. They only see him as someone in history that shaped the way that black people thought, like Booker T. Washington. But there were always two different school of thoughts. You had the Booker T. Washington school of thought, take care of yourself, we're going to do it. Then you had W.E.B. Du Bois, his school of thought, which we never mentioned or even talk about socialist roots. And
favoring the teachings of Karl Marx and for joining the Communist Party. These accusations were true. Today, more than half the people of the world live under a socialism which is growing toward communism. In my mind, there is no doubt but that the world of the 21st century will be overwhelmingly communistic.
On the day before the March on Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, who inspired a lot of King's political philosophy, passed away. There was a debate over whether a tribute should be paid to him during the March on Washington, but the communists were afraid that this would jeopardize King's leadership. He would, however, pay his respects during Du Bois's posthumous 100th birthday celebration.
When King was coming, I know what was going on in our circles. Don't mention the Communist Party. We'll put King in a bad way, blah, 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 blah. James Baldwin made a great speech, but he never mentioned the Communist Party, but he said everything but that. I think he got the memo. But somehow, Martin Luther King didn't get the memo, because here's what he said. We cannot talk about Dr. Du Bois without recognizing that he was a radical all his life. Some people would like to ignore the fact that he was a communist. It is time to cease muting the fact that W.E.B. Du Bois was a genius and a communist. Our irrational, obsessive anti-communism had led us into too many quagmires to be retained as if it were a mode of scientific thinking. That was Dr. Martin Luther King. He was a great democratic revolutionary, probably the greatest we've had in this period.
I would say that for the Negro American, the I Have a Dream speech closed a chapter of Do for Self, which marked the era of Booker T. Washington and ushered in the era of revolution and protest, resulting in a drastic shift in the mentality.
I would say go check it out. Chad O. Jackson over at Instagram. I thought it was a really good piece. I've looked at several of his reels and videos, and I don't think he's that far off. I don't think he's that far off at all. I think the ideology that we have embraced, and you're talking to someone that I grew up learning the I Have a Dream speech, internalizing it, and literally going to different churches in the AME church and actually delivering it. And it was very interesting. Standing ovation, people loved it. And at that point in time, I was like, man, this is awesome. The beginning of actually speaking in front of tons of people required me to actually learn that so I can go out and compete with it. So in the course of that, I never sat back and actually thought about the ideology of King. I mean, I just accepted what was given to me. You think about it, you're 13, 14 years old. Like, you're going to sit back at that time with no internet and research King. So as technology, again, not even mentioned, begins to move forward and advance in some of these pieces in history that nobody wants to talk about, nobody discusses, technology will now be the thing that brings a lot of those things to light, because you can't quite hide it any longer. You can pull people that have old film and that covers this, and back in the day you wouldn't know it unless you had the VHS to actually go over it. VHS, for some of y'all that don't know, VHS is actually the way we used to listen to stuff before CDs, right? But they didn't have that. Now it's light years faster. What would be on VHS and take years to circulate from household to household, we've got social media where that can just be displayed. And what's even cooler and deeper about it is we can turn around now and use things like ChatGPT to confirm whether this information is right or wrong. And if you're really diligent about it, you'll go to a library, you'll pull out a book, and you'll actually read a physical copy to tell you the truth.